Yeah, should we begin, Asma?
Yeah,
Okay, so hello and good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining for this session. And today's speaker is Asma Shirin, and her topic is the Red Sky Paradox. This journey of this paradox series we started on around on the astronomy day around 10th of October, and we are slowly coming towards the end. So let's start with the talk. And if you, in case of any kind of doubts, you have two options. Either you can just put it in the chat box, or you can ask towards the end, whichever is like feasible for you. Yeah, Asma, you can start. Yeah, thank you.
thank you, Archit. So, a very good afternoon, guys. Today, I'm going to talk about the red sky paradox. So, extending from the Fermi paradox, pondering over the questions where are the others? Where are everyone? Are we alone? Now, we're standing on the red dwarfs. So, basically, what are these red dwarfs? Red dwarfs are the smallest stars of around 0.08 to zero point 0.5 stellar mass, low surface temperature stars, which are of the spectral types K or M. These are smaller diameter stars, maybe around a few tenths that of the sun, and they are quite small, which is attributed and which relates to their faintness. Due to their smaller size and due to their smaller mass, they evolve very slowly, and their estimated main sequence lifetime is about 100 billion years. Their red appearance. As appearances can be deceptive, these are red because of their lower temperature, reaching only about 6,380 degrees. Now, moving on to an important thing about the convection. These red dwarfs fuse their hydrogen to helium. These are completely convective. This means that their energy and the material generated by the fusion in the stellar core is carried up to their surface, and there it cools down and sinks back to the core again. This prevents the accumulation of helium, which is a prerequisite for the core helium fusion and the commencement of the red giant phase. So instead of building up this helium in the core, these ones constantly mix and their fuel is used up very slowly, contributing their huge lifespan, maybe spanning about trillion years. Therefore, when this hydrogen fuel supply is exhausted and there is no longer any radiation pressure to counter gravity, these star collapses and heats up to become a white dwarf. So now, as we've known about these red dwarfs, let's talk about some special types. When we talk about the ABO types of stars, these are 1.6 stellar mass and denoted by the spectral series ABO. These have the main sequence lifetimes about 2 billion years as compared to our sun's 10 billion years. So now this poses us a question. Due to their shorter lifespan, this actually cut shorts their opportunity for biology to evolve from the smaller chemical matters to the complicated, intelligent, intricate, multicellular life forms. So now, when you talk about the red dwarf stars, these are the most numerous and long-lived star in the cosmos, and every 3 out of 4 stars in the Milky Way galaxies are the red dwarfs. The reason exoplanet discoveries indicate that there are abundant rocky temperate planets around them, and these outnumber stars like our sun by a factor of 5 and outlive them by another factor of 20, and combined these gives an 100 times probability. Now, this presents us with the apparent paradox, apparent logical question that why don't we see a red dwarf in our sky? Why do we orbit around a yellow star instead of a red dwarf? Now, let's talk about this. We all have studied about the Bayes theorem, the Bayesian statistics, and never in my life I thought that these Bayes theorem, the Bayesian statistics would indeed provide solid evidence or would give concrete proofs to prove that why do we not orbit around a red dwarf. Now let's discuss about some of the terms in this Bayesian statistics where probability of I given G. This is a probability of finding intelligence given that it is a G type of star. Here, the G stands for the is a shorthand for the FGK types of star or the sun-like stars like ours. Now, we describe the emergence of life and intelligence as a uniform rate defined by the rate parameter lambda g. And Tg is the emergence of intelligence, and this has a finite time window within which intelligent life has to occur, and after which there might be a terminal extinction of complex life. Beyond this, life or the intelligent life cannot occur. So now let's talk about these equations. What is the probability of finding intelligent life given that it is a G type star? For the probability of at least one successful emergence of an intelligent life is equal to 1 minus exponential of minus lambda g into Tg. So as we take the Tg or the time to zero, the probability tends to zero. And when we take the time to infinity, by this I mean that the window here, as we define the time window for intelligent life to emerge, to occur, to spread, or to thrive, when it goes to infinity or there is a longer time, then the probability of finding an intelligent complex multicellular organism in a G type of star tends to 1. And this can also be extended towards the red dwarfs. Now let's go into the Bayesian statistics. By the Bayes theorem, we know that probability of finding us orbiting a sun-like star, given that the intelligence has occurred, is this formula, and this can also be extended towards a red dwarf. Now, combining all these equations, we find an important equation which forms the basics for the resolutions that we're going to discuss. So given these terms and equations, now we're going to move forward towards the 4 possible solutions, which is grounded upon the Bayesian statistics. The first one of them is the resolution one, which tells us that our situation is an 1 in 100 outlier. The second resolution is that FGK dwarfs provide us a better habitability than the M dwarfs. Third resolution, life doesn't have enough time to develop around M dwarf. And fourth resolution, Earth-like worlds are rarer than we think. Now let's go to each of these resolutions in detail. The first resolution or the solution for this is about luck or the chances. This resolution tells us that our existence around an FGK dwarf is merely an unlikely chance event or a fluke event. Now, when we really go deep into that, let's talk about this graph to understand this better. So suppose we consider this area. So this is a probability graph which tells us that in which the y-axis represents the probability, and which as a function of the evolution or emergence of intelligence. In this particular region, the emergence of intelligence is very, very, very fast, and while in this particular region, the emergence is quite slow. So what does this tell us? When you see to this point of time, it tells us that the probability might be 10 power minus 1, or there is 10% chance of a fluke. While when you go to this area or this emergence of or the area where the emergence of intelligence is quite slow, the probability might be very, very, very less, or it is 1% probability. So now when you discuss or when you abide that the intelligent life forms emerge quite fastly, the emergence of intelligence is very fast, then it would give us an outlier of 1 in 10. This means that the red sky paradox is dissolved. How is this possible? Let me tell you. In case that the intelligence is emerging quite fast, even though a planet or a star is living for trillion years or a billion years or maybe moderate, it doesn't really matter, because intelligence is spawning and thriving very, very, very quickly, so that this lifespan or the longevity of the star doesn't really matter. The only thing that matters is the evolution of the intelligence, which is already so fast. So this actually gives us a solution to the red sky paradox, which tells us that, if the emergence of the intelligence is fast, then there is no problem. Then even though the red dwarf is very, very, very has a very high longevity, it doesn't really matter. But here comes a problem. This is in tension with the Earth's history. If you look into the Earth's history and consider maybe the fossils, when you look into the multicellular organism, the very, very intricate multicellular organisms, it poses you a question. According to this, that the emergence of intelligence is quite fast. If you abide by that, you see that these complicated multicellular organisms might have evolved quite before than what their actual geological record tells. But this is a problem, because we have found out the year or how in which particular time period has this organism evolved. But according to this resolution, it tells you that these might have formed far before. So this is an apparent contradiction. And another thing is that this also comes in tension with the Fermi paradox, because had the emergence of the intelligence been so quick that it has indeed colonized areas, then for sure our universe might be teeming with intelligence. Most of the planet we see might have been teeming with intelligence, because the time scale, the evolution time for intelligence to occur is quite fast. But again, as I told, this is a contradiction, therefore we have to leave this option. Now, when you come to this particular area where we're telling that the slow emergence, when we look into the slow emergence, we come to a 1 in 100 outlier. So let me explain what this means. If the emergence of life or emergence of intelligent life is quite slower, then the probability of us in the earth will be quite low. But still, here we are in the earth talking about all these things, observing planets. So what is the reason? So this gives us a point which tells us that we are special. We are indeed privileged to be existing at this point of time, at an unlikely place, at an unlikely time. And this again comes in contradiction with the Copernican principle, which tells us that Earth is just a simple planet. You know, it is just a tiny drop in the vast sea, and it's nothing special. So now we are again in contradiction. So we need to explain why is this happening. So in case of the slower emergence, we find that even though the emergence rate is slower, here we are on Earth talking about this. So the reason might be the selection bias. For example, let me give you a simple example. For instance, human beings need water for living, right? So suppose we inhabit a planet, or we find ourselves in a planet which has maybe water, quite good amount of water. Then it isn't strange, because you know it should not be strange that we happen to exist on a wet planet, even if there are quite dry planets in common. So what happened here is that, even though this is a fluke, like this is a selection bias happened, so that we were selected here and we are still thriving on Earth. So this resolution isn't quite, we have a lot of speculation about this resolution, and we aren't quite convinced with this. So now we move on to the next resolution, which tells us that life or intelligence emerges rarely on the M dwarfs. So let me give you theoretical explanation to this. These M dwarfs, there are quite powerful flares that comes out of these red dwarfs. For instance, as I told, because of the conviction in the core, which is really, really powerful, they produce magnetic fields. And again, due to the attributed to their smaller size and due to the smaller mass, they can indeed twist these magnetic fields to, unleash powerful flares of UV light, plasma, and X-rays, which are really, really deadly. So now, even there occurs super flares. These super flares might be formidable that it can even burn out the planet around it. For example, the nearest star to us, the Proxima Centauri, it flares around once in 2 or 3 days. So this situation is very, very, very deadly. So for example, let's consider that we are living around an M dwarf. We have a planet which is habitable. We are living in an M dwarf. It means that we need a very, very powerful magnetic field to counter this deadly flare, or else we would be dying out. The human population might even be wiped out because of this huge deadly flare. And if you compare this to our Earth, the super flares that is produced by our sun is very, very, very low. It isn't so deadly as what M dwarf is producing. So therefore, there is a need of enough strong magnetic fields produced by these planets, which is highly unlikely. Another thing is that of the ozone layer. We humans need ozone layer for the protection from these UV rays. But due to their occurrences, often these super flares occurs in many of the planets, sorry, in many of the dwarfs. So this can indeed destroy pretty much of the ozone layers, and this exacerbates the situation and makes us worse condition so that we can't thrive on a M dwarf. Another reason might be, these M dwarfs take a long time to settle down to give a mode of stable output. Now, here, let me talk about another thing. Since they take a longer time to give these stable outputs, there is a problem. Do any one of you know about, the greenhouse effect, the running greenhouse effect? A planet in our Earth, in our solar system, happened to be a dune like desert world because of this, the running greenhouse effect, because of the exhaustion of water. Can any one of you name that planet? It might be, should I give you a clue? It is called as the Earth's twin. Hello, come on, somebody give me. Hello. Okay, so it's a Venus. So as because of this, the running greenhouse effect, this occurs when the planet is absorbing a huge amount of radiation than what it can give out. There, this leads to a situation called as the running greenhouse effect, which leads to the exhaustion of water. The planet becomes deprived of water, and this leads to dune-like desert worlds. And this is really hard because we have to talk about the pre-main sequence phase of the star of the red dwarfs here. This pre-main sequence is a time scale between the star formation and ignition or the nuclear fusion. So during this time, if there happens something of this sort, that is, the running greenhouse effect happens, the whole of the water gets exhausted. Now, after this phase, that is the pre-main sequence, when they go into the main sequence where the star's luminosity becomes stable enough to make the planets habitable, to make life possible in one of the planet, these planets don't have water now for supporting life forms. This is another important contributing factor. Another thing is about the absence of Jupiter-like planets. Why are these Jupiter-like planets important? This is because even for Earth, because of these Jupiters, they protect us from the asteroid hits, which can be deadly. For instance, we were told that we are known that the dinosaurs got extinct because of the asteroid impacts. So absence of these Jupiter-like planets might be another important factor that can contribute to the emergence of life only on the planet, on the stars like our sun, and life or intelligence rarely emerge on the M dwarfs. Now, coming on to the resolution 3, the truncated habitable window. So when I talk about this, we have to talk about many things in which are important regarding the planet system. So when you talk about the habitable zone of these M dwarfs, they might vary. That is, the M dwarfs are composed of smaller red dwarfs. Sorry, the M dwarfs are composed of smaller ones, larger ones, mightier. So there is a huge difference in their size in the habitable zone. So when you talk about this, the red dwarf stars spend more time on this pre-main sequence. The pre-main sequence, as I told, it is a the phase between the formation of the star and the time where it starts to ignite or the helium fusion happens. So since in a planet like Earth, which is orbiting around Sun, there is more window of opportunity for evolution by natural selection. So now you can question me. I've told you that, I mean, we know that the M dwarfs exist, or they have an advantage of longevity because they even span for trillion years. So as it spans for trillion years, as it has a very long life, then why doesn't it have more windows of opportunity? This is because as I told you, when we go to the definition of T, the emergence of intelligent life has a finite time window. If suppose you need to if you suppose you need to have intelligent life in a particular planet, it has to occur within this TG, and after this it is very unlikely that life can emerge, and even this can lead to extinction. So now when we talk about this, the temporal aspect, or when we are into the time aspect of the M dwarfs or the red dwarfs, there is a very short time for the complex biology, that is, the production of humans, maybe very very intricate life forms, multicellular life forms from chemicals. That particular time period is very very short, and therefore the red dwarfs have a very truncated habitable window. And even here we can talk about the running greenhouse effect, that is, because of the deprivation of water from these, they aren't suitable for living. Another thing is that we have found out that many of these planets revolving around the red dwarfs are tidally locked. What this means is that one side of the planet is always facing the sun, sorry, always facing the star, while the other part of the planet is always in darkness. So this means that the other part, which is in darkness, is deprived. It is rendered airless, rendered what I mean. It is totally frozen. So how can life sustain on such a thing? So this gives us another contradiction, and therefore this might be a possible reason. But again, during the early violent phase, that is this pre-main sequence phase, maybe many of the young infant red dwarfs produce are maybe they produce violent flares, and in this particular time zone, those planets which are present on the outer edge of the habitable zone, for instance, how Mars is to Sun, the position of Mars with compared to Sun. So if there are such planets around the red dwarfs, their habitability can be done, life can thrive there. This is because they make use of the extra energy that is given out by these planets, and they can distribute this energy. And we can even study this hypothesis by observing the young dwarfs out there. So this is a possible thing to observe. Now coming on to the fourth and the last resolution, it is about the paucity of pale red dwarfs. Scarcity of habitable zone planets around the red dwarfs is an important thing. So now you can ask me again, there is an apparent contradiction. We are being told that there are a lot of exoplanets, I mean, indeed, rocky exoplanets in the habitable zone around the red dwarfs. But the thing is that we've only discovered, or we've only studied about the mightier ones, the ones with higher mass and which are of the larger size, because they're easier to observe. As I told, because of their smaller size, because of their faintness, because of their dimness or the lesser luminosity. These are lesser luminous because they use make use of their fuel very low, so that whatever the output they're giving is also quite low. So we can't observe most of the smaller planets here. So whatever we know currently is that of the larger ones, which gives out these flares. So when you talk about the smaller red dwarfs, these are the numerous and the most abundant ones as compared to the mightier ones. So we really don't know what is the habitability of such smaller red dwarfs. They might be very different because they are very different, their masses, they're very different in their lifespans. So we have to study on them. And the abundance of planets around them might not be uniform. That is, if you consider a small red dwarf, the abundance of the planets, maybe the thickness or the region of habitability of this M dwarfs might be very, very different as compared to a very large M dwarf. So these the properties like the composition, the satellite system, the impact rate of these, of the planets, of their properties, can indeed affect the habitability. And thereby, if the habitability is affected, therefore the intelligence, the emergence of intelligence is also at stake. So therefore, since we have only known about the mightiest stars, the easily observable ones, we don't really know about all the stars that are out there, the numerous small young red dwarfs. So we need to know about them in order to study things. So these are the four resolutions that has come up very, very, very recently. That is, I think it was published on June or April. This paper was published on June or April. So therefore, this is an active area of research. Now I would like to draw your attention to this graph. So when you see this, this is a billion time scale. The Earth became habitable around this region, around this place, and you can see that life emerged quite quickly. And from this point where life emerged and to this point where intelligence emerged, it is very, very long. But now, when you see this region, that is, we can observe that within maybe 300 million years or less than that, intelligent life, or we all might become extinct, because life on earth becomes uninhabitable. Earth becomes uninhabitable due to varying reasons. So therefore, this points out to the need of exoplanets for discovering planets. Therefore, sometime maybe we might embark upon a voyage, an interstellar voyage to a red dwarf to study that. So this becomes an important thing. And therefore, I would also like to, give a positive approach to this. For example, let's consider about the Barnett star. The Barnett stars have the super Earth. I mean, it may not be on the habitable zone, but it has a very large iron and nickel core, which produces a magnetic field to protect it from the solar flares. And they even have thick layers of ice surrounding the ocean that harbors ecosystems that are independent of the radiations. For that, this means that there is habitable planets around the red dwarfs, and we need to really understand these things in order to thrive. We need to find more things. So this isn't possible with the kind of technology that we have. We need to have more advanced telescopes, because in order to study that young dwarfs, we need to have spectral analysis of their environment. Maybe one of them might be habitable. So in order to find that, we have a lot of roadblocks. Another thing I should have to mention is about the tidal logs. So as we've already told about the tidal logs, these tidal logs makes life in around the red dwarfs uninhabitable. Because of these tidal logs, the earth or the life or the air is prevented or is deprived in the darker region. But there are arguments and theories that is coming up telling that the climatic things can indeed take the energy on the side that is facing the sun. The energy from that side can evenly distribute to the other side, on the darker side, so that they can even become possible, they can even spawn life. So this 20 times extra time scale that is presented by the red dwarfs might give us a possibility so that life can emerge there. There are varying things which we have to assess so that life can be possible there. Indeed, nowadays, with the advancements, we have even studied about the TRAPPIST-1 system. So this TRAPPIST-1 system contains 4 exoplanets in the habitable zone, and even some of them have a rocky appearance. So there might be life possible on those stars, on those planets. But we need to really look upon that. And we also need to talk about the Proxima Centauri. The Proxima Centauri is the nearest star to us, and it has a Proxima Centauri b, which can also be habitable, but we need to study more on that. So, since, as I told, there is an observational resolution dilemma that we are facing now, because most of these are quite small, we are facing a dilemma that we are not able to study things. So maybe with the development of technology, with the development of intricate space telescopes, we might be able to study each of these planets, and somewhere, somehow, at some time, we can possibly find out a planet which can thrive, which can indeed support life, which can even evolve intelligent life, where all of our planets, all of our animals, indeed the life can thrive. So I really hope that one day we will definitely embark on a voyage to some, maybe young or an older, mightier red dwarf, where there is a planet which can thrive, which can, where life or intelligent life can emerge. And these are the bibliographies and references that I've taken, and that's it. Thank you. And I'm open to questions now.
Yeah, thank you, Asma. It was a really interesting and informative talk. Yeah, does anyone have any questions? You can feel free and unmute. Okay, so since no one has any questions, I think we can conclude the session. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Thank you, Asma, for the informative talk.
Thank you, guys. Thanks a lot for joining.